Good evening all, and welcome to the first episode of Ghost Week. You're in luck, because this whole week I have a whole host of interesting topics, some of which I've never done before. Tomorrow we've got Haunted Woods, Wednesday we've got Witchcraft Stories, Thursday Historic Ghost Stories, which are stories that are over 100 years old, and finishing off strong with Haunted Hospitals on Friday. So be sure to tune in every day this week to get your spooks. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Twice in my life I've used a Ouija board. The first time I did it didn't seem to work that well. The board was a bit dodgy, and there was one person in the group who I was certain was moving the glass for theatrics. I couldn't prove it, but I had my doubts. The answers to the questions were sketchy, and not all of them made sense. The one thing that maybe might have proved it was real was that I remember for weeks after we did it, our cat at the time would just sit outside the doorway and stare, right in the direction of where we had set it up. We all noticed that it was kind of weird, as he'd never done that before, but he eventually stopped and we forgot about it and moved on. Perhaps we did make a connection, and our setup was just wrong, or our etiquette was off. Either way, I remained largely unconvinced that we had contacted actual spirits. The second time, though, was an entirely different outcome. A few years later, I moved across the country to attend university. One day, me and some of my uni friends got on the topic of Ouija and decided we'd have a crack at it one night. But this time we would do it properly. One of my friends did some research on how to do it properly. None of the others beside me had tried Ouija at this point, so we were going in mostly blind. But my friend made us a proper board setup and even used a sage smudging stick to cleanse the room of bad energies. Once that was done, the four of us sat down and got to it. I will mention here that I was still very skeptical, so I went in with the mindset of carefully observing the other guys to see if they were messing with the glass. But throughout the entire session, the movement was so fluid and precise that all my doubts quickly evaporated, and I was genuinely astounded that there was a supernatural entity interacting with us throughout this entire session. But that wasn't the only reason I started believing. The conversation we had with the spirit was so clear and yet so bizarre, I'll remember it forever. One thing my friend said that was paramount to the experience was courtesy. So we started off by basically asking if there were any spirits available to chat with us, and when we got a yes, we introduced ourselves and asked if it wouldn't mind speaking to us for a bit. Another yes. We apologized for intruding and made it clear that the spirit didn't have to answer any questions it didn't want to, and we began our questioning in earnest. I won't give the whole transcripts, but here are the basics. We were speaking to a spirit of a soldier killed in 1984 from Yemen. He quite enjoyed the afterlife or whatever he was in at the time. He made it very clear to us that death was not the end, and there was nothing for us to fear in the afterlife. He said the concept of heaven and hell were untrue. He also said reincarnation was possible. I remember asking if it was Buddhist style, to which we received a yes-no, so I interpreted that as sort of. After all this, we then decided amongst ourselves to wrap things up, having already had our minds blown away by what we had just experienced. We said thanks to the spirit and wished it all the best. We also waited for the spirit to say goodbye to us. This, according to my friend, was an important part, as it would allow the spirit to return to its own realm easily. And that was it. I walked out of that room with a strange feeling of bewilderment and yet enormous relief. If what the spirit said was true, and I had no reason to believe it was lying to us intentionally, then death was almost something to look forward to. I considered myself a pure atheist up until this point, but this one night rattled that belief so hard, I can no longer consider myself as such. and I'll always carry this memory to prove me otherwise. Thank you for listening. If anyone has any questions about my experience, feel free to ask away. I'm more than happy to go through them in the comments. My grandfather, as in my dad's dad, passed away when I was just 7 months old. I never got the chance to know him, but his presence in our family never truly faded. You see, not long after his death, my dad, along with his 4 brothers and 3 sisters, decided to try and communicate with him through a Ouija board. They were young and curious and grieving, and to their surprise it worked. The sessions weren't terrifying or chaotic like you'd expect. In fact, they were calm, comforting even. My grandfather spoke to them, especially to my father, the youngest of the siblings. There were long, emotional conversations. My dad said he could feel his father's energy as though he was still alive, still watching over him. But those interactions came to an end when my dad got married. My grandfather's spirit told them that his purpose here was complete. He had fulfilled all his duties, and he would no longer respond, and was ready to move on. After that, the Ouija board was tucked away and forgotten about, until the year 2014. That year, tragedy struck. One of my uncles took his own life. He took it via rope, in his home. And during the funeral, something deeply unsettling happened. My younger brother, who coincidentally was 7 months old at the time, the same age I had been when my grandfather passed, kept crawling towards the ceiling fan where my uncle had done the deed. No matter where we placed him in the house, he always made his way back to that spot. He'd look up, reach out, and begin softly caressing the air with his hands, as if someone were hanging there, watching. It wasn't random baby behavior. It felt intentional, specific, sad, and chilling. Fast forward about 7 or 8 years. One ordinary night, I was sitting with my dad. We were bored doing nothing, just talking, and jokingly I said, "Let's try the Ouija board." I didn't expect him to take it seriously, but his eyes lit up. "All right, let's do it," he said. We didn't even have a proper board. We scrawled out the alphabet and symbols in chalk on an old cutting board. Barely functional, but it would have to do. My dad first tried to call on his father, but just like the spirit said many years ago, there was no reply. Then I suggested we try reaching out to the uncle who had passed. My dad was hesitant, but agreed. The planchette moved, slowly, then confidently. My dad started crying almost immediately, grief and recognition flooding back all at once. It was like the air got heavier, thicker. We asked the spirit questions, some personal, some emotional. But then we asked something we probably shouldn't have. We asked about my cousin. She had just gotten married and we wanted to know if she'd have a happy life. The spirit spelled out loud and clear, no. Every question that followed about her relationship, her husband or her future came with equally grim answers. This cousin had already suffered enough. She lost her entire family in a car crash back when she was in 7th grade. She deserved peace, love, and stability. But when I came back from her wedding, I understood. Her husband was awful, arrogant, self-obsessed, and strung out on something every time I saw him. He even disrespected my dad during the wedding and talked to him like he was dirt for just trying to take a picture. But back to the night of the seance, things weren't right. As the session went on, the atmosphere in the house changed. The curtains began to move even though every door and window was shut tight, and I felt a cold hand rest lightly on my back. And I know what you're thinking, but I swear we were alone in the house, just my dad and I. And then there was the perfume. A strange, unfamiliar scent. Old, floral and cloying. It came out of nowhere, and my hands turned icy cold. It was April, but I was shivering. And the worst part? We lost time. What felt like 2 hours was actually 7. We started at 8 p.m, and when we looked at the clock again, it was nearly 3 a.m. We couldn't explain it. We didn't even notice the time passing until it was gone. There's something else too. My mum's side of the family has always had this sensitivity. They've had dreams that come true. They feel auras and energies around people, places, even spirits. My mum inherited that gift, and it seems I might have a trace of it as well. She can sometimes see shadowy forms, especially spirits with strong auras. I can't see them, but I can feel them, almost like someone watching me standing just over my shoulder. That night I felt everything. I felt the sadness, the tension, the presence. Something had been awakened, or maybe it had just been waiting. People scoff at the idea of spirits. They say Ouija boards are a joke, just a bunch of cheap theatrics and subconscious movements. But for my family, they've always been more than that. These boards have been windows, conversations, warnings. I pray that my cousin's future isn't as bleak as how the spirit said it would be. I hope things change. But deep down, I think I already know the answer. And it scares me. My mum was born in the year 1950, and she went to a religious college in Rexburg, Idaho. She was with some friends one night at her house. There were probably about 15 people there, and no one was drinking or doing hard drugs. They had just had dinner and were hanging out playing games. Someone brought out a Ouija board, and since this was years and years and years ago, no one really knew as much about them as we did today. So, a lot of people didn't know that they should have stayed away from it. My mum said she didn't participate, but she sat next to them and watched. I have to say, my mum told me this story many times and the details never changed, and she's not a person who'll make things up, so I have no reason to doubt this story's authenticity. So my mum's watching about 8 of the 15 people use the Ouija board. They're asking a lot of questions, and it's getting moved around. But with so many people, she didn't know if someone was moving it, or if it was real. There was a girl that my mum didn't know very well who was there, and she was getting really into the Ouija board. They knew there were certain kinds of questions they probably shouldn't ask, but this girl started asking really specific ones. They started out pretty innocent as Ouija boards can be, I suppose, and then the girl started asking questions about demons and wanting to see dead people and know the future. They're a bunch of religious people, so they were starting to get quite freaked out and wanted to stop. But the girl didn't want to stop, and asked a few more questions, which at this point I can't really recall what they were. But she refused to stop. They finally all convinced her that they needed to, right before they were able to say goodbye. She didn't ask a question, she said, and this is the part I'll never forget, "I want to see you." Before they could say goodbye, the planchette moved to yes. Everyone started losing it. They said goodbye and put the Ouija board away and started playing charades to kind of lighten the mood. While the game was being played, the girl just happened to be sitting closest to the door. My mum said she was sitting on the other side of the room, where she was facing the door, so she would be face to face with this girl, but about 10 feet away. Someone knocked on the door, and since no one else was being expected, they all kind of froze. I think they were all a little freaked out by what had happened, especially the fact that this girl had gone really crazy and asked a bunch of scary questions. So after about 30 seconds of pausing, this girl gets up and goes to the door. She opens it and for some reason the porch light is out. It hadn't been out earlier. My mum said from where she stood, she could see it looked like there was a dark shadow standing right outside the door on the porch. It was just a shadow to her. There were no facial features, there was no clothing. It looked like a black thing in the shape of a person standing there. Only a few people were facing the door, so most people had their back to it and didn't see what happened. The next thing my mum knows, this girl falls to the ground and passes out. Everyone's focused on her and no one noticed that the shadow had vanished. They called an ambulance, but the girl didn't make it. She had a heart attack. At least, that's what they were told. They were given information the girl's heart just stopped. My mum never had any other experiences, or saw anyone else play with them. I've also never touched a Ouija board. I don't believe for a second anything good can come from one. The demons speaking through it may seem kinda nice because they want to catch you off your guard, but their end goal is to possess you. Some can do it quicker than others. But just playing the game, you're allowing them to speak through you and open up yourself to them. Moral of the story, don't play with the Ouija board, and if someone pulls out, leave the house. I was around 19 when this happened. My younger sisters and I decided to visit an old cemetery, not out of disrespect or thrill-seeking, but curiosity. We brought a Ouija board with us. Looking back, I realized how risky that was, but at the time it felt more like a game. We sat in a quiet corner of the cemetery and began the session. It lasted maybe 20 minutes, and we spoke to what felt like multiple spirits. Nothing threatening. The board moved slowly but deliberately. The air was still. The mood was calm, almost too calm. Then out of nowhere, one of my sisters started crying. She wasn't panicked, just overwhelmed, and all she said was, "We need to leave." That was it. No explanation, just this urgent knowing. So we did what you're supposed to do. We said goodbye, ended the session, packed up and went home. And for a while nothing unusual happened. It all just faded into memory. Until a few weeks later. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of feet shuffling at the end of my bed. The floor was carpeted, so it was a soft but unmistakable sound, slow and deliberate. I looked up and saw a figure standing there, barely illuminated by the faint glow from my phone charger, just a silhouette. I assumed it was one of my sisters. Maybe she couldn't sleep, I whispered. "Are you okay?" No response. "If you're scared, you can sleep in my bed." Still nothing. I stared at her, thinking she was messing with me, trying to be spooky. But the longer I looked, the less certain I was that it was her. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it at the figure. And there was no one there. Oddly, I wasn't scared. I didn't feel threatened or watched, just calm, like whatever had been there meant no harm. From then on, little things started happening. Drawers in the bathroom across the room would open by themselves. I'd hear rummaging, soft and careful, never aggressive, and sometimes I'd politely ask, "Can you please stop that?" And it would. It was like having a roommate that I could never see. A few months later, I moved 3 hours away to live with my then girlfriend, and the spirit came with me. Same signs, same presence. The soft sound of the drawers opening and closing. Gentle footsteps on the stairs at night. Even the attic manhole in our roommate's room opening on its own from time to time. My girlfriend at the time made my life a living hell. I won't get into details, but it was an emotionally draining relationship. Weirdly enough, the spirit brought me comfort. In those dark, stressful nights, she made me feel less alone. I don't know how to explain it. I just knew she was there, and she cared, without ever saying a word. Less than a year later, I ended things and eventually met someone new, Miley. She was spiritual, gentle, and deeply intuitive. From the beginning, she sensed something else in the house, a presence, and it unsettled her a bit, even though it never did anything malicious. Miley had this ritual. Before bed, she imagines placing protective rings around the people she loves and around the house and me, a kind of psychic barrier, a shield made of intention and care. And just like that, the spirit was gone. No goodbye, no final moments, just gone. I've been with Miley 5 years now, and things are good. Peaceful. But I still think about that spirit sometimes. I don't know who she was or why she chose me, but I feel like she stayed just long enough to get me through something I couldn't have handled alone. And once I was okay, once I found safety and love in someone else, she left. I don't know if she was truly ever mine, or she was simply passing through, offering comfort where it was needed most. But I miss her. Wherever she is now, I hope she knows that I'm grateful. When me and my friend were kids, maybe around 10, we used to mess around with Ouija boards like it was a toy. We'd ask dumb questions, laugh and joke around. Nothing ever really happened, so eventually we just tossed it aside and forgot about it. Fast forward 5 years, I was 15, and for some reason we decided to pick it up again. I'm 19 now, but that second round of Ouija hit very differently. By then, I had actually taken the time to educate myself. I knew the basic rules: never play alone, always say goodbye, never ask for a date of death, stuff like that. I'd also read on spiritual protection, and started taking it a little more seriously. But every session I'd say a small prayer, visualize myself surrounded by white light, and focus on setting intentions. I felt safe, like I knew what I was doing. But here's where it got weird. Every time we used the board, the letters M and N would come through over and over, just back and forth like a metronome. We finally asked for the full name, and it spelled out my great-grandmother's name. This stopped me cold. She was a deeply spiritual woman, someone everyone in my family respected. I never met her, but I'd heard stories, how she had this strong intuition, almost a sixth sense, and how people used to go to her for advice and comfort. I'd asked the spirit what year it was born, and no hesitation, it gave the correct year spot on. From that point on, every time I tried to connect with another spirit, MN came through again like clockwork. It didn't matter what we asked or how we started, it always circled back to her. I stopped using the board for a while. I figured maybe she was trying to tell me something, or maybe I was just imagining too much. Then, just recently, I was visiting friends from school 130 miles away from my hometown, and I noticed one of them had a Ouija board. I hadn't used one in months, but something told me to ask if we could try it. We sat down in the dining room, I said my usual prayer, and encouraged my friends to protect themselves as well, just to be safe. At first, nothing happened. The planchette just sat there still. Then I loosened my fingers a bit, not pushing, just letting go, and it moved to MN. Right there, in a different city, with different people who had no idea about my past experiences. I began shaking, not out of fear, but this overwhelming feeling of confirmation. I hadn't told any of them about the MN connection, not a word. As we kept going, I explained what was happening, that I think the spirit was my great-grandmother, and how she's the only one who ever comes through no matter where I play with or who. One of my friends said, kind of casually, "It's like she's protecting you," and immediately the planchette moved to yes. I don't care how crazy this sounds. Something deep in me knew it was true. I felt safe, seen, grounded, not scared, just connected. And now I keep wondering, was that really her? Is it possible she's still looking out for me from the other side? Is she trying to keep me away from something darker by blocking the other spirits? I genuinely would love to hear what others think, because to me, it's real. She is real. When I was in 3rd grade, about 8 years old, I was invited to a friend's birthday sleepover. There were 3 of us, our host Lillian, another girl, and me. It was an exciting event, filled with all the classic sleepover activities you'd expect at that age. We began the night by playing the board game Life, where you roll the dice, navigate your little car around the board, and fill it with the plastic peg family members. Being young girls with vivid imaginations, we named the husbands pegs after the boys we had crushes on at school. There was a lot of giggling and daydreams as we played, and after we finished the game, Lillian snuck into her older sister's room and came back with something that immediately intrigued us: a Ouija board. She claimed it was just a fortune-telling board game and suggested we played it for fun. None of us at the time had any idea what a Ouija board truly was, or its supposed connection to the paranormal. To us, it was simply another way to ask silly questions about our futures. We started with light-hearted questions. How old will I be when I get married? What will my husband's name be? How many kids will I have? Boys or girls? The planchette seemed to glide over the letters, giving answers we eagerly interpreted and giggling over. When I asked, "What will my husband's name be?" the board began to spell out T-A-N. My friends burst into laughter, teasing me about Tanner, the new popular boy who had just transferred to our school. My face turned red as I waited for the board to finish, but then it spelt out V, and a series of letters that didn't form a name I recognized. My friends laughed it off, but I felt confused and left out. I'd expected simple answers like everyone else, but my reply seemed like nonsense. I asked the board another question: how many kids will I have? It responded with 0. That answer startled me. Every adult I knew had children, so this felt strange. I rephrased the question. I asked something along the lines of, "Will I ever be pregnant?" This time the board answered yes. While my friends were getting answers that aligned with their dreams and expectations, mine felt vague, disjointed, and unsettling. I brushed it off though, thinking the board was just a game, and we moved on with the night. It wasn't until decades later that the memory resurfaced with striking clarity. I met a man whose name started with T-A-N-V, a name that matched the seemingly nonsensical letters the Ouija board had spelled out all those years ago. He became my husband, and we have been happily married for over 20 years now. The board's other predictions about having no children also turned out to be true. But despite not having any kids of our own, we built a joyful life together, filling our home with love, an older cat, and plenty of time spent with younger cousins and nephews. Looking back though, this experience feels eerie and strangely prophetic. At the time, I didn't believe in the Ouija board or any supernatural connections. I still don't know if I do. But those answers, which made no sense to my 8-year-old self, now feel oddly significant in hindsight. And whether or not it was a coincidence or something more, I'll never be able to forget it. When I was 12 years old, my mum had what I can only describe now as a serious lapse in judgment, and what I like to call a questionable parenting moment. She brought me along to her friend's house because they were planning to use a Ouija board. Her friend had been experiencing strange things in their home for a while. They reported seeing ghostly children that weren't there, doors locking themselves, words like "this is hell" scratched into the doorframe, when no one remembered them being there before. And even service people, electricians, delivery guys, claiming they saw someone standing on the stairs, only for the house to be empty. It all sounded completely insane to me at the time, but I was curious and too young to fully grasp how serious or dangerous this could be. At first, I was just watching from the side while my mum, her 2 friends and another guest sat around the board. Things were quiet, a little slow, nothing really to write home about. But after a while I asked to join in, and for some reason my mum let me. As soon as I placed my fingers on the planchette, everything changed. It began moving fast, not the slow, uncertain glide you expect. This thing was practically flying across the board, and we were all struggling to keep our fingers on it. It definitely wasn't one of us pushing it. You could see the surprise and confusion on everyone's faces. The board spelling was sloppy, like a frantic scrawl rather than a clear communication. We had to piece things together by guessing, and then, when we were right, the planchette would shoot to yes. First it said it was a little boy, then a girl, 2 children. That lined up exactly with what people had claimed to see in the house. They said they were trapped, held there by a man, an older man, not their father, not someone they knew in life, just him. We didn't get too many details. This was 20 years ago, and it took ages to extract each piece of the story, letter by painstaking letter. But what stuck with me was this feeling of sorrow and fear coming through, like they were powerless and desperate. And then the energy shifted. Something else came through. We knew it wasn't the children anymore. The planchette felt more forceful, almost angry. The spirit claimed to be the man who was holding the children there. He said they were his, and that he wasn't going to let them go and that they belonged to him. I don't remember everything he said. I just remember feeling cold, heavy, like a shadow had moved in the room, which was watching us from the corners. At some point, maybe to break the tension, my mum and her friends made the mistake of laughing, joking around like the whole thing wasn't serious, and that's when it took a sharp turn. The planchette began to move violently, spelling the same letters over and over. We couldn't figure it out at first, until I hesitantly guessed, stupid, and it instantly shot to yes. That's when the board turned on us. It brought up deeply personal and traumatic things, stuff no one in that room could have known about. It mentioned my mum's attempt on her life from years ago. It called out one of my friend's miscarriages, another abusive relationship. It was digging through everyone's pain like it knew us, like it had been watching. Everyone was shaken. Tears. Silence. We were done. Or at least, we should have been. In our panic and emotional overwhelm, we left the planchette on the board and stepped outside for air, trying to regroup. Just 5 minutes on the porch, that was all. When we came back, the planchette was no longer on the board. It was across the room. The little glass window in the center had popped out and was lying separated on the floor. We didn't ask questions, we didn't try again. We just packed everything up and said goodbye and left. The car ride home was dead silent. I remember sitting in the passenger seat, staring out the window with this tight, cold dread curling in my stomach. I couldn't shake it. Like something had been left open, like something had followed. To this day, I wonder if that experience changed something in me, opened a door I haven't fully been able to close. I've experienced too many strange paranormal things since then to write off. And trust me, I'm not the kind of person who wants to believe. I get scared easy. I try to rationalize everything. I want things to have a logical explanation, but too many of them haven't. I've never touched a Ouija board again, and I never will. I tell people not to mess with them, especially if they think they don't know what they're doing. They think I'm being dramatic. But this really happened, and I still get chills whenever I think about it. And that feeling of unease creeps in. My dad got me a Ouija board for Christmas. Most people would probably call it a weird gift, but we'd actually talked about it for a while. It's something I'd always been curious about, and to be honest, I thought it was kind of perfect. The board itself was beautiful, round, which I've read is supposed to be special, maybe even a little safer. And now my dad is very science-minded. He did a Ouija session when he was younger, and said it was weird but nothing too wild. I, on the other hand, am an astrologer, so I'm already way down the rabbit hole of spiritual and symbolic. Lately, as I've gotten older, I've noticed my dad becoming a little more open to things he once dismissed. It's actually really nice. So after Christmas dinner, we sat around the table, me, my fiancé, my mom, my dad, and decided to give it a go. My dad was cracking jokes the whole time. I told the shop if it doesn't work, I want a refund. My mum, though, was serious. She used to attend spiritualist meetings and has had her fair share of strange experiences, so she approached it with a kind of quiet reverence. Both of us were a bit nervous, to be honest. We did a light protection meditation just to be safe, and then placed our fingers on the planchette. And nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. Just 4 people sitting around a table staring at a very still piece of wood. We figured the planchette might have too much resistance. It had a felt bottom, so we swapped it out for an ordinary glass. That's when things shifted. I gave the glass the tiniest bit of pressure, and the ideomotor effect took over. Or maybe something else did. It began to move. J, P, H. And I began to cry. At first no one understood why I was so emotional until I told them. Those were the initials of my late Nan. Anyway, after the initials on the board or glass, it started giving us strings of random letters. Most of them didn't mean anything at all, but then my fiancé googled one of the combinations and bizarrely somehow it led to an address. Right across the street was a Kingdom Hall. The weird part? That's where my Nan used to go. Not as a Jehovah's Witness, mind you, but because she liked how they studied the Bible and loved to argue her views. Very her, honestly. We were kind of stunned. The board also spelt out my name, my fiancé's name, my dad's name, her son, and even his exact age. It felt too precise to be random. After that, the board went back to gibberish, the energy fizzled out, but the whole experience was emotional. Even my dad, the eternal skeptic, got teary-eyed. He couldn't explain it, and for a moment I don't think he wanted to. As I sat there at the table, I couldn't help but wonder how much of it was just the ideomotor effect, and how much of it might have been real. But I've always believed emotions are a good compass when it comes to the unknown. There was no fear in that room, just a strange kind of peace and curiosity. Still, I'm left with some questions. If that was my Nan, why so much random nonsense? Why not clearer communications? Is that just how it works? Would doing it again help clarify things? Or just leave me more confused? It's definitely made me want to try again, if only to see what else might come through. It's one of those experiences that sit with you, quietly sitting in the back part of your mind. I was once in a room at a party where 2 people from my school were using a Ouija board, and they were supposedly, according to what the board said to them or their subconscious or one guy moving about it and lying, take your pick, talking to a classmate who had recently died driving to school. Everyone there barely knew the guy, even me, although he was in a school play I was in as well, and we had never spoken much to each other. And the others there only knew his name and the fact that he died on the way to school and not much else. It just so happened I had seen him a week or so before his death in another town and recognized him. I was only in the room, not touching the board or anything, and I heard who they were talking to, supposedly. And I said, "Oh yeah? Then where did I see you alive last?" The planchette spelled out Hardee's. Now, I had not told a living soul. No one. He wasn't in my group of friends. No one I knew him. And no one at the party was a friend of his, only schoolmates. I have no explanation for that. The reason I confidently threw that out and phrased it as I did, as it was in another town, and it was odd to me to see someone from school there, not to mention a dude who a week or so later died on his way to school. The town our school was in only had one fast food place at the time, and if you were trying to guess, You would have picked that, probably. That event convinced me that at least in some cases, Ouija boards can be used somehow to access some knowledge that normally no one would have a way of knowing. It did not say something general like a meeting place or even a fast food place or a restaurant. It threw out the name of a specific place in a town 30 miles away from our school. I have since, later in my life, had other things happen, such as living in a very haunted house for some years, but I'm sure you will just dismiss that, and that is your right. But I know what happened there, and I have reason to believe that Ouija boards definitely have something to them. About a month ago, I bought a Ouija board. For a while it just sat in its box on display, more of a conversation piece than anything else. But a few nights ago, me and my uni mates were pre-drinking before heading out clubbing, and someone randomly suggested we give it a try. We were a few drinks in, so of course I was like, why not? I grabbed the board from my place along with some crystals, rose quartz, black obsidian, hematite, smoky citrine, and black tourmaline. I also brought 5 candles. When we got back to my friend's living room, we arranged the candles in a circle, lined the perimeter with the crystals. Everyone did their own form of spiritual protection before starting. One friend made a prayer to Allah. Another, who I believe is a practicing witch, he even showed me his Book of Shadows, which was incredibly kind of him, offered a prayer to Vishnu. Then me and another friend asked Hecate for protection. It was an electric circle, but respectful and genuinely grounded in each person's belief of choice, which I appreciated. Our first attempt felt off. The planchette moved in strange, erratic directions that didn't make much sense. One of the basic rules I'd read beforehand was, if it feels wrong, end the session immediately. We were drunk, sure, but all of us agreed something wasn't right, so we closed the session politely. Not quite ready to give up, we tried again, set up the same protections, and asked, "Is there any spirit who wishes to communicate with us tonight?" The planchette moved to 8. When we asked their name, it spelled out D8, D8. That freaked me out. I read that sometimes spirits try to create an infinity loop to keep the portal open or gain entry to our world. The D8 movement mirrored that looping energy. It could have been nothing, or it could have been a trick. Either way, we were spooked enough to immediately end the session again. I closed the circle as calmly as I could, and we went outside for a cigarette and regroup. For our final attempt, things felt a bit different. Calmer, more coherent. We asked the same initial question. Again, yes. This time, the spirit identified as Trudy Shanti, male, born in 98 and died at 26, which would place the death in 2024. One of my friends immediately searched the name online but couldn't find any records. We kept asking questions and received clear, coherent answers, but something still felt off. "Are you who you say you are?" And the planchette slid over no. We said goodbye politely, closed the session, and decided to take no chances. We brought the board to the garden and burnt it. It took several attempts because of the plastic coating, but eventually we destroyed it thoroughly enough to feel safe throwing it away. Nothing weird or unlucky has happened since. I think our protective measures helped, but I'm still left wondering why lie. What was the spirit's intention? Was it trying to gain trust or something more? That was my first experience with a Ouija board, and it might have been my last. This all started when my friends and I brought a Ouija board from Goodwill. For some background, I've lived in this small, poop-brown house in Elk River, Minnesota for the last 4 years. The house was built in 1980, and I live here with my mum of 40 and sister of 18 and brother 16. Elk River is a little town surrounded by rivers about 15 minutes away from the Halloween capital of the world, which honestly feels fitting now. Growing up, I didn't believe in anything spiritual. I didn't believe in God, and I always said ghost stories were exactly that, stories. But that changed in 8th grade. Back then I lived in a different house where weird things would happen. The TV would turn on by itself and start flicking through channels. One time my friends and I took a picture in the backyard, and when we looked closely there was a shadowy figure standing between me and one of the boys in the dark, with no lights and no one else around. That moment was my shift. That's when I started to believe. When my parents divorced, I moved into this current house during my junior year of high school, and again it started with that Ouija board. My friends and I originally brought it just to mess with my sister. She's always been into spooky stuff, so we staged a little prank. My friend faked screaming and threw the board at the wall for dramatic effect, but the second it hit, the whole house went quiet. The energy shifted. I had a bad feeling, so I boxed it up and put it away. About a week later, I was in the McDonald's drive-thru with my friend Kayla when my sister called me freaking out. She asked if I was home and I wasn't, obviously. I was trying to get a McChicken and iced coffee. She said the bathroom door handle kept turning while she was in the shower. My brother was at school and my mum at work. She works 2 jobs and isn't home until around 6. I told her, "Well, don't die, I'll be home soon." Hung up, got my food and headed home. When I got in, I yelled for her. She came out of her room looking pale and said, "I came out earlier, saw no one, but I swear I just saw a woman walk down the hall." Another time I got home at around 3 a.m. after a casino trip. I did my usual, brushed my teeth, washed my face, climbed into bed. At around 3:45, I suddenly heard this high-pitched ringing in my ears, and then my blanket got yanked off. Most people would probably freak out. Me? I pulled the blanket over my head and went to sleep. My friends have had experiences too. They've heard their names whispered in the middle of the night. Kayla was once sleeping on the couch upstairs when she felt the blanket getting tugged. She figured it was me messing with her until she rolled over to swap me and saw no one was there. I was in my room downstairs the whole time. Then there was the time I was packing to house sit last January. I left my phone in the bathroom playing music propped on the towel rack. I was in my room when I heard something fall. I walked in to find my phone on the floor. At first I brushed it off. Perhaps a notification made it vibrate and fall over. But that's when I noticed something strange. My candle, which had been sitting securely near the faucet, nowhere near the edge, was out of place. I picked up my phone, shook it and went back to packing. Not 5 minutes later, glass shatters. I run back in and the candle that had been near the faucet now was smashed to pieces on the floor. Another day I was doing the dishes by hand because we don't have a dishwasher. There's a window above the sink and I was home alone. I felt my hair start to move. I look in the window reflection and a thick strand of my hair was sticking straight up on the back of my head. My hands were wet, but I quickly smoothed it down. And not a minute later more hair started rising. At that point I was done. I stopped what I was doing and firmly said, "You're not allowed to touch me," and went straight back into my room. The house has a vibe. I don't know if it's the boards or just some lingering energy that latched onto us, but it's real. I might not believe in a deity, but after everything I've seen, I do believe something is out there. What do you guys think? Am I haunted? Or just crazy? When I was 13 years old, I was fascinated by ghost stories and the supernatural, so naturally I asked for a Ouija board for Christmas. One weekend, my best friend came over for a sleepover, and we decided to try it out. We were in my room with the stereo playing and a small Hello Kitty lamp on for lighting while we watched movies. After setting up the board, I remember feeling both skeptical and ridiculously excited. It didn't take long before we nervously said hello, and to our shock, the planchette began to move. We both freaked out. I was convinced my friend was pushing it to mess with me, but the answer it gave left me stunned. It claimed to be my grandfather, someone I had never met. My much older siblings had grown up with him, but he passed away long before I was born. The spirit told us about sitting on the deck in a rocking chair peeling apples for my siblings. Still suspicious, I went to ask my mum about it and she confirmed the details. My grandpa used to peel apples for my siblings all the time. That was enough for me. I shoved the Ouija board into my closet and refused to touch it for the rest of the night. But the night wasn't over. At the time, Avril Lavigne's Complicated was one of the biggest hits, and we had her album playing in the background while we used the board. Eventually, we went to bed, turning off the lamp. I woke up in the middle of the night to find the lamp on. Thinking my friend had turned it on because she was afraid of the dark, I switched it off and went back to sleep. When I woke up again, the lamp was on. This time I left it on, assuming she'd done it on purpose. The next morning I mentioned it to her, but she swore she hadn't touched the lamp. I wasn't spooked just yet, but suspicious. A few days later, I was listening to the same Avril Lavigne album again. As Complicated came on, my mum and I had to leave the house for a bit. When we returned, she scolded me for wasting electricity by leaving my lamp on. I didn't remember turning it on, but I brushed it off as an accident. That night, the same song came on the radio. I woke up in the middle of the night and once again the lamp was on. At first I convinced myself it was faulty wiring, but I lived in an apartment, and after all, strange electrical issues weren't unheard of. But then something happened I couldn't explain. One day Complicated came on the radio again while I was in my room. My friend wanted to play outside, so I turned the radio off, switched off the lamp and closed my door before leaving. When I got back, the lamp was on. That's when everything made sense. The lamp only seemed to turn on whenever that song played. I tested it a few more times, and the pattern held. To this day, whenever I hear that song, my anxiety spikes. Years later, I found the Ouija board tucked away in storage. I hadn't touched it since that night when I was 13, and just looking at it gave me chills. I didn't even want it in my house, so I carried it straight to the dumpster. To this day, I'm not sure what happened. Was it really my grandpa reaching out with a sense of humor, or some bizarre coincidence? Whatever it was, I'll never play that song again, and I won't touch a Ouija board either, for that matter. I hope you enjoyed these stories. Thank you all so much for listening. Why not tune in tomorrow for Haunted Woods? It's gonna be a great set of stories. I also would like to thank all my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen for their continued support of the channel, which means the world to me. If you'd like to help out a bit as well, follow the links in the description to find out more. But until next time, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.